I am Jonathan Humphreys. Welcome to the HoCoSo Conversation. I am having a conversation with Chris Mumford from Service Leadership. He is an expert on executive level recruitment and organizations. We will be having a varied and wide-ranging discussion on what it takes to be a holistic leader. We will be covering all kinds of topics, especially around building your resilience and inner immunity and how important it is in regards to your overall performance. We hope you enjoy this podcast, and we encourage you to join us on the journey of learning more about how to apply some of these aspects to your positions in hospitality and leadership. Thank you. All right, Chris, welcome to the podcast this morning. It's a pleasure to be having a conversation with you. I think we're going to cover a whole wide range of topics to do with wellness and health in leadership and professional performance in regards to the hospitality industry. Going back to the early part of your career, what was your approach generally from a personal perspective when you were deciding what to do in life and, deciding to get into hospitality? Can you remember how you were as a person, whether you were very logical in terms of your thinking and decision making, or were you honed by your gut instinct of what you would like to do?
Yeah, absolutely, Jonathan. I mean, I think when I look back to how I started, it's almost like a series of unfortunate events. You could classify it as, kind of accidents that came along the way. I don't think I had any real defined master plan of what I wanted to do. I opened myself up to experiencing a lot of different things. I had this particular lust for travel and adventure and exploring new things and going places or doing things that my peers weren't necessarily doing. So that took me to, as part of my degree, I spent a fantastic year in Germany, and then I graduated and I thought, well, let's go further afield. Let's go to Japan. So I had this incredible time teaching in Japan, which had a couple of benefits. One, it put off getting a serious job and being paid in Japanese yen at the time, which was good. But I just had this lust for trying to go and experience new cultures and live somewhere completely different and alien to what I knew. But it wasn't necessarily a part of a grander plan. It was just, well, that sounds fun. Let's go do this. But then while there, I had the option to turn that from 1 year into 2 years into 3 years. But I did have this itch in the back of my head that I wasn't necessarily being challenged enough. So I came back to London after a year, but again, with no real idea as to what I wanted to do, other than I wanted something to involve travel, to involve the international landscape. I mean, my degree was in languages, French and German. So I wanted to try to make use of that. And I was drawn more towards businesses which had a high level of personal engagement versus manufacturing or tech. And while I was actually just towards the end of my time in Japan, a contact of my parents had invited me to lunch at the Four Seasons in Tokyo, the Four Seasons Shinsanso Hotel as it was. And so we had a wonderful lunch, and he was trying to give me some guidance. He was in the textile business and constantly moving between London, Chicago and Tokyo on his career, which sounded fun. But he said, well, why have you thought of the hotel business? And I remember looking around, and the restaurant manager, and there was this quiet Sunday lunch, but an American guy. I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. This American guy's working in this hotel in the middle of Tokyo. That looks fun. And so I thought, well, maybe I should look at the hotel business. So I started to look casually at that sector. And it happened that a couple of months after I landed back in London, there was a recruitment company called Profile at the time, which specialized in recruiting people for luxury hotels all around the world. And they were looking for an entry-level researcher position, kind of quasi assistant to the founder. So I went along for that, and they said, how much do you want to be paid? And I told them, and they said, well, we can give you this. And so I said, well, it's about $3,000 less than I wanted, but okay. And I obviously proved myself, and 3 months later, they put me back up to the number I wanted, and the rest is history, if you like. So that's how I got started in hotels, and I rapidly fell in love with this space. I mean, I found it fascinating. I would sit there going through this book listing every hotel in the world, and I would have to find out who's the general manager of every Hyatt hotel around the world. So I'd be on the phone all day long to places like Kuala Lumpur and Dubai and New York, and so that was tremendous, a good way to cut my teeth.
That's wonderful. It sounds as though you were led by your instinct to do certain things, try out certain things. And if I look back on my early part of my career, I just had no intention of going into the hospitality business. It was what was available back then. I started working in a 5-star hotel that was owned by a Forte hotel group, but I just had this yearning to be in London. I couldn't explain it. I just needed to be where everything was happening in the UK. And that was it. I was literally going to do anything to be there and then figure it out from there. I had no further plans. So I just went to the Forte head office in London and just sat in the lobby and gave them my portfolio of work that I'd been doing for the last year in one of their hotels. And I said, can I speak to anybody? And eventually I met several people and they gave me a job in the headquarters. But that was it. I didn't have a plan beyond that. But I just felt this need, like I really needed to do that.
I think it's having some drivers, I had this driver to kind of go abroad. Likewise, it sounds like you've also kept yourself open to the opportunities that present themselves. I have my closest friend who knew from a very, very early age that he wanted to be in radio and to be a journalist, a radio journalist. And he focused on nothing but that all through our university days and degree. He was up in his room and working for the local BBC radio station, and he's still with the BBC today and couldn't be happier. And he had this singular focus, which is, some people do. A lot of people don't have that, but they have itch or driver behind them. Certainly in my case, it's been about having opportunities present themselves, like my opportunity then to go to New York in 1999, and kind of being open to grabbing those when they come up with both hands and then making it work for yourself.
I mean, maybe one could argue that those that have a calling to do certain things, you can argue surgeons and medical profession teachers, as you've highlighted your friend who's now a broadcaster, it's kind of a honed instinct from a very early age. And I like that in a way. Some people have that and they're able to act on it, right? But I feel like we also have a honed instinct, and sometimes it gives people the opportunity to know exactly where they're going. Some of us have a honed instinct which gives us a direction of where we ought to be going. And if we ignore it, that's where things start to become challenging, because you get into a personal conflict to a certain extent with your honed instinct, and also where maybe other opportunities you're presenting you which are not aligned with where you want to be going. This combination of being open to these opportunities, you were presented with opportunities, but at the same time, there must have been something that resonated with you, that excited you, where you said, this seems to be something that I'm going to really enjoy. You had an early stint in New York, which you've mentioned, and then you had an opportunity from there coming back to London. So I'm just wondering, there must have been other opportunities that presented themselves to you where you thought, oh, well, that's not quite right, or it doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I think if I separate out the opportunities that I dove into with both feet versus the ones which I passed on, it comes down to a very physical, instinctual feeling in a sense. I mean, it sounds cliche, but it feels right or it doesn't. And it's hard to define, well, what is it that doesn't feel right about it? And sometimes you just know, your body tells you, you kind of have this nervousness about it. You're not sure, kind of humming and ahhing. You're taking time to respond to people. It's kind of the signs and indications are there where you're not really enthusiastically passionate about this. And I think whereas the opportunities you actually go for is very easy. I mean, I think back to moving to New York with 2 suitcases to open an office. I didn't give that a huge amount of thought, really. I just said, yeah, let's do it, let's go. And similarly, when we moved back to London with HVS, didn't require agonizing sleepless nights of thinking, is this the right thing to do or not? It just was instinctually felt like, yeah, this is the right step to do. There are other things that have presented themselves over time, and it's like, yeah, I can see. And you start writing your pros and cons list, and I think once you start writing your pros and cons list, you pretty much already know the answer.
I think that's fascinating, actually, because I would say that early move that I did to London as well, I didn't have anywhere to stay in London in those days, and they offered me a staff accommodation in the Cumberland Hotel at the back of the Cumberland, which in those days was a 6 square meter room with a single bed. And I just remember being so excited by the prospect of being in the heart of London on the Edgware Road and all the other stuff that was going on in the area, and being able to literally walk to work if I wanted. I didn't think about a 6 square meter room and single bed and like some shitty TV that was kind of hanging from the ceiling that didn't work. Whereas if it didn't feel right, I would have had that pros and cons list. And there's many times in my life, it's funny, I've done that pros and cons list and haven't taken the opportunity. Because you're right, as soon as you start trying to draw out and trying to balance out what is a good opportunity and what isn't, then, as you said, you probably know the answer already.
The difficulty as you age and you start to have more, call it baggage around you, right? So you have maybe family and so on to consider, and it's not just you. It's not just a selfish act anymore. Then you've got to have other people, those around you, to buy into it, and you need that support network as well. So that's where it becomes perhaps more challenging, because it's not just, oh, this feels great for me, but it needs to feel right for my wife, for my children, or whoever. So it starts to get a little more complicated.
That personal buy-in is linked in a way to your personal community. And the support from your personal community with regards to what you're doing, I presume, has an impact on professional performance. If I maybe just give a little anecdote to kick this off, I'm sure you've seen this through all of the recruitment of the executives that you've been involved in over the years. I did my executive MBA when I was in my early 30s. And one of the first classes was a professor from Chicago in the US, and he'd flown over to Germany. And it was the very start of a 2-year intense program where we were basically doing this alongside full work.
Yeah.
And every few weeks we'd go to Germany for a long weekend, and there was all the other stuff that went with it. And he said, I'll just give you some advice. You can take it or leave it. But he said, if you want to get through this program, and it will be exciting and you'll have great fun and it will be very stressful, I really encourage you to be open to everybody around you about your personal commitment to this program, and that it's going to take your personal time. It's going to involve making priorities to that program, and make sure everybody around you understands how important it is to you and that they support you. He said, you won't fail this program because you're not competent enough. You'll fail this program, or you'll fail your job, or you'll fail your relationship, because your personal community around you, and that could involve your boss, your employee, your colleagues, your spouse, your family, your kids, your friends. I remember missing some really important situations with my friends, but I was really open to everybody. And I had wonderful support through that 2 years. And I couldn't have done that without being open to everybody around me and just saying, look, I really appreciate you supporting me. If you do have any concerns or issues, please let me know. I think that was the first time I realized the importance of a personal community. And I wonder maybe if you can touch on that through your personal experiences, but also through the people that you've recruited for other organizations over time. When did this come to light that this is quite an important?
Yeah, I think this acknowledgement of the personal life and its interplay with the professional life, it feels like a fairly recent phenomenon universally. If I look back to the last 20 years I've been in, there was at the beginning, and I think this still exists to a large degree, this expectation of, in the professional world, that you're superhuman and that you give 100% to your work, and there's very scant regard given for anything else you may have going on in your life. The most important thing is, and I certainly can relate to this from when I started out and companies I was associated with in New York and then back here, the sole focus is on business performance and results, and it's almost perceived as a sign of weakness if they're saying, well, I can't do that because I really got to get to the kids' play at school, or I'm taking time out to go on a retreat this weekend, whatever it may be. I think the business world is starting to adapt to that in certain sectors, perhaps more than others. And I think the millennials have been pushing that quite heavily because they're rebelling against, or they have rebelled, and the following generations rebelled against this. Well, we're not robots. We have holistic lives, which we need to satisfy all areas of our lives, not just the work one. I think I've certainly seen this transition. I think there's still a ways to go in terms of how employers and organizations create the environment that individuals can lead full lives. And certainly from the years I've had recruiting and executives and being around people at the upper levels of the organization chart, if you see what drives professional performance more than anything else, it's typically some personal issue. So someone can be going through a divorce, or they can be suffering with depression, or they can be having health issues. Something somewhere along the lines will lead to cracks, and then there'll need to be a change in that individual, move them to another part of the business or move them out of the business because the performance level isn't being reached. I think there's a case of trying to support employees with those issues as an organization, as a business, to help them then be able to fulfill their both professional and personal ambitions. And there's an important aspect of self-awareness from the individual standpoint and being real with themselves, because a lot of it is also self-imposed, right? This is certainly my case until probably the last few years, where I felt a huge pressure pressure, I guess, that was imposed by myself on myself to be 100% responsible to my work. If I wasn't being 100% responsible to my work, if I was taking time away for that for something else, like, oh, I need to pick up my son from nursery or whatever, then I would feel this guilt that I wasn't living up to my duty towards my work. And it takes time to come to terms with that and to be aware that maybe I can't be 100% dedicated to my work. Maybe 85% is good enough, but then that 15% is benefiting another part of my life, and it's all interrelated and interconnected. And then my home life is happier, then suddenly my professional life will actually become easier. To your point about the support network around you, and you've got those people buying in. So it's something which is a challenge for a lot of people. And I think in hospitality, I mean, I see how much travel a lot of people in our space do, obviously pre-COVID. And I think the COVID has been a tremendous opportunity for a lot of people actually to take stock because they haven't been able to travel. But you just look at, take a day last year, 2019, and a typical amount of travel, someone in particularly areas like hotel development that you and I know well, these guys are on planes all the time and barely at home, which may be fine for them. But if it's not, they need to recognize it and address it.
I like the idea that actually this is much more about holistic leadership going forward. Looking at all facets of one's life. Having been through that, maybe it's a generational thing to a certain extent. I also had a feeling of guilt if I was doing other things other than focusing on work. But I've also realized now in more recent years that I get a lot of energy from doing those things which I feel a need to be doing, whether it's looking after myself, whether it's doing some exercise, whether it's being with friends, whether it's being with family, whether it's doing some meditation, whatever it is. If I don't do these things, I cannot perform. And I notice now much more that I have this, you could call it performance enhancement by doing other things that are important. I like listening to myself. And I feel maybe going forward, there's this opportunity to be part of an acknowledgement around a holistic approach to leadership. If the leaders themselves embraced this approach, actually, most of them do. I'd like you to talk about this a little bit more. Most of them do. And that's what allows them to perform very well or exceptionally. However, most of those leaders don't communicate what they're doing in other areas of their lives in a way that then makes them vulnerable, right? And therefore seen as more human, to this point about being seen as superhuman. So like this impenetrable aspect to leadership, right? You have to be this person that everybody looks up to. And if you maybe reveal part of your life that is more vulnerable, maybe you say you're involved in this or that, it could be seen that you're more penetrable. You've had a lot of relationships and insights with leaders. Performance is not just about work performance. And generally, very successful leaders have a holistic approach, but maybe they don't openly communicate it. So I was just wondering if we could kind of focus on that bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are becoming more accepting of the conversation, but traditionally it's been seen as a bit foo-foo or kind of hippie connotation to talk about, well, I meditate every morning for half an hour before looking at my emails. This is coming into the public sphere more and more, and people are starting to open up about what they're doing. I think this is the differentiators between good leadership and average leadership. Good leaders, they're comfortable enough in themselves and self-aware enough that they can do the vulnerability thing. Brené Brown is probably the leader on talking about vulnerability among executives and the work she does, but opening oneself up to those around them in a transparent way can have huge benefits. It doesn't mean you need to completely share everything, but to your point, it's showing that you're not superhuman and thereby not expecting my team to be superhuman. Okay, we've all got stuff going on. Everyone has stuff. And I think you can still drive a high performing culture, driving incredible results in that context of not being superhuman and being willing and able to say, well, listen, I'm having a rough period. I got this and this going on, but it doesn't distract from what we're doing. There's a way to make it all work. And so I think leaders who people want to follow are those that are open about that and kind of let the armor down, if you like. I mean, again, in our space, almost becoming a cliche now, talking about how amazing Arne Sorensen is, but he has that humility around him. Before his illness, I don't think anyone necessarily would have seen him as portraying himself as this superhuman can do it all. I mean, he talks about family, he travels and goes running with hotel staff. I mean, he's engaged. I think he's pretty approachable and accessible. And I think that's the sort of leadership these days which engenders great engagement from those around them, as opposed to just being this kind of aloof figure who sets targets and is kind of in this ivory tower which no one can, as you say, to your word, penetrate.
What I'd like to just pick up on is this aspect of self-awareness and being very comfortable in one's own skin, which allows the opportunity to show that vulnerable side. The reason I bring this up is because we are, as leaders, expecting more and more of our teams, and we're expecting more and more in terms of their performance and contribution, even with things like flexible working and all these different lifestyle approaches. At the end of the day, it's all about moving the needle, right? So there's generally less resources. People have to be more efficient. They have to be more innovative. They have to be more creative. There's less process, and yet at the same time, everything has to be sped up. There's the integration of technology, which is impacting from every single aspect. There's massive disruption going on in the sector. People are losing their jobs. All of these pressures are accumulating. And this isn't just connected with our sector. This is connected with a lot of sectors, but ours specifically under hospitality, which has been just decimated by what's been going on. All of these pressures are accumulating, and therefore this ability for the leaders in those positions to be really comfortable within themselves, to acknowledge that within their team and allow them to express it and bring it out, but at the same time bring the best out of their teams and their organizations. That is a big ask. It's a big ask,
yes. Yeah.
Right? So are we talking, and I'm going to coin a phrase here, building your inner game? Are we talking about trying to somehow figure out what your inner game is, how it works, and trying to build that up? As you said, Arne Sorensen, I mean, he's been through many things, including cancer. At the same time, it looks as though, and I've had the fortune of meeting him, he's a very genuine, authentic, approachable person. But he looks and he feels like when you meet him, the kind of person that he's been building his inner game for a long time. He's been very conscious about doing that and self-developing. And I wonder if we could just maybe focus on that, about what kind of things people can develop to build their inner game, and also maybe some where you've seen this work, maybe your personal journey of how you've approached it.
Yeah, I think to that point, it's creating the self-awareness and knowing oneself without the prism of any judgment on it. So to have your inner game, you've got to be aware of what's going on inside you and with you, and in some cases just allowing it, not necessarily with a view to having to change it. But if you're super stressed, better to realize, be aware, oh, I'm super stressed right now. How's that coming out? How's that showing itself? Let's explore that. Where's that coming from? As opposed to playing this role of, well, I haven't got time to think about that or worry about that. I got to do this is, you know, I got all these tasks to do, to your point. Got to do everything quicker, and going into the automated role of, again, trying to be superhuman without actually recognizing what's going on. For me, a lot of it is a journey which I think is infinite. I don't think it has an end. I don't think you've reached a point of complete self-awareness or knowing oneself fully. It's a practice and an exercise of trying to get there, and you build up these tools. But for me, it's that level of awareness has been quite transformative in the sense of, okay, feeling this, what is that? Why is that? Not to say it's good or bad, but just to recognize it. And that I find that mere act of having the awareness of it actually helps to dispel some of the power of it, and to allow you to move on and accept things and start to look at some of the uncomfortable things, which isn't something any of us like to do. It's something we tend to try to stay away from, but that just puts you into this almost mothballed way of operating and tunnel vision of, I've got to get this and this done. But actually, if you can create that awareness, and people do that through different ways, whether it's meditating, or I like to use a body scan feeling system. So I check in with my body and listen to what that is saying, because I find that tells me quite a lot of things. So that can be as simple as a 5-minute walk, or sitting in a chair for a few minutes and just actually checking in with my breathing, what's my body feeling right now, and allowing that to come into the sphere of what your day is, what you're dealing with, can be very helpful.
I like this approach that you've mentioned. I'm just going to give a personal anecdote here as well. I literally was on the whole time. If I think about my development days, I was on a plane, it was buzzing, I was in meetings, I was going from one trip to another, I was flying from Siberia through to Nigeria. I loved it. I did it for years, but I was on.
like always on. And if I wasn't doing something, then I was running, I was doing something else. I wanted the adrenaline. I loved it, whatever it was. But I was self-distracting as well, right? So I was constantly self-distracting. So if there was something that was annoying me, or if there was something that was creating some conflict at home, or there was some stress or whatever it is, I would pretty much self-distract myself out of it, right? And just kind of carry on. But what's interesting is that it took me a while to start to realize these things pile up, right? Mm-hmm. You kind of avoid them at your own peril. And what I like about this approach that you've mentioned is that it allows you to just check in with yourself, like just taking a pause. Right. I don't think I ever gave myself pause. Just, switch off for a bit and see how you feel. Maybe just no distractions, nothing. Right. And just figure it out. And then be true to yourself. Right. How you're feeling. Maybe physically, are you feeling drained? Mentally, are you feeling like a bit fragile? Is there other things going on? Didn't really do that, if I'm honest. Always went from one thing to another. Definitely doing that a lot more today than previously, but I like that suggestion.
If I may, I think we can maybe talk about the value of pause in a second, but what I'm trying to work towards is trying to develop presence. And you can be going at it 100 miles an hour and getting on a plane from Siberia to Nigeria or whatever. And you can do that, but you can do that and be present doing that. Or you can do that and your mind is somewhere else. I guess my mind would always be busy thinking about what's next in a business context and what have I got to do and have I done this and da da da. And meanwhile, someone's talking to me and I'm barely paying them any attention. And that could be somebody talking to you in a business context or personal, but you're missing out on what's actually happening here right now in this moment. Ultimately, you have this moment now is gone. You only have what is now. So that's my challenge, is trying to stop worrying so much about what's coming down the track or what I've got to be doing, and actually missing out on smelling the roses, if you like, in terms of what's happening right now. And again, that's part of when I check in and the body and so on, it also involves sound and sight, and I'll listen to the birds. Again, you can risk sounding a little bit foo-foo, but it's that checking in with the moment. What is happening right now? I've found for me that brings some calm and some clarity of thinking. And again, it's just, you can be flying at 100 miles an hour and still be present.
I like that a lot. If I think about the great leaders I've had the opportunity to interact with over the years, I would say Mr. Marriott is one of them. Mm-hmm. He gives you this impression he's fully focused on you for that moment, that 20 minutes, whatever it is, half an hour. I've also, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, and it's partly the advent of technology. I've been in meetings where people have been on their phones, in big meetings, presentations where people have been on their laptops doing their emails. So talk about being absent. Right. But, this multitasking culture that creates all of these things colliding, where we are expected to do so many things at the same time. But I've really always tried to take the opportunity to be focused on what I'm doing at that particular point in time. Even if during this discussion, Chris, if I just start making some new notes about things, I'm already distracted. For me, it's about really trying to focus on this moment. But I think that's a good hallmark of a leader as well, this presence, this focus, like just being in tune. And actually, if you look at just the 3 levels of listening skills, right? You've basically got, first level is you're listening, but trying to figure out what to say next, right?
Right.
And the second level of listening is you're really trying to absorb what's being said and then making some kind of additional contribution. And the third is then really looking at everything from the body language to the way somebody is breathing, to the way that their pupils are dilating and how they're sitting and how they're moving and the environment, and then listening to the subtleties of what they're saying. And I think as a leader, that kind of extra level, especially with your team, like picking up on some of these subtleties, you need focus.
Yeah, I think if I reflect on, I've been fortunate enough to meet some amazing people in the hospitality sector over the years. And if I look at some of the leaders, the ones who stand out, there's this calmness to them. And as you say, focus. And you think, how the heck do they get everything done? It's a bit like high performing sports, right? You talk to a Formula One driver or top ranking tennis players. They talk about how time kind of slows down for them because they're in their zone. And for us mere mortals, it's like, well, how on earth can you make these adjustments on your steering wheel at 180 miles an hour as you're going through a 3G corner. They're operating at a completely different time frame. And I get a sense of that with the leaders that I meet that stand out, is they have this capacity to focus on the present moment, and it instills this calmness and this engagement and attention, and yet somehow they're getting everything done. They've got their act together.
I think they do, but even to use your analogy of Formula One, I mean, what a brilliant team around a Formula One driver, and the amount of trust that you have to have in your team in order to deliver. Because if you're making that corner at that speed, you better have ultimate trust in everything that they've done for you up to then. You can't have any second thought in your brain. And also, I wonder whether there is an analogy here with the way that great leaders build their teams. In order to operate in that zone of, let's say, calmness, you've got to have absolute trust in your team. You've got to know that your team is there. They've got your back. They've got the organization, that they're doing everything and beyond, right? If there's shit going to hit the fan today whilst you're out doing a meet and greet with employees at a particular hotel, if something major happens, they're going to handle it. They're going to deal with it, and it's going to be smooth.
That's a two-way street, right? They trust you because you've built the culture of trusting them, vice versa. It's an interesting thing to explore as where does the trust originate, but I think it's from the leader initially trusting in the team, that the team's going to do their utmost because they trust as a leader you're going to represent them, you're going to look after them, you're going to drive peak performance and operate at the top of your game. So that's a symbiotic relationship, but it starts with the leader, and that then comes from a place of what values have they instilled and what's the culture, and it all comes back to, again, that leader's self-awareness, right? Because that's where all that other stuff comes from.
Chris, you built teams and businesses. What's your approach been as a leader? I mean, obviously this is a personal journey for you, but it's also, you've had the opportunity to build and lead teams. How much of this have you been able to put in place over the years? Obviously, it's an evolution. As you said, we're constantly, and hopefully we are evolving. All of us, I think it's our obligation, actually. It's our obligation whilst we're here for our limited time to try and do as much of that as we can.
Yeah, I think if I look back at the teams and the people I've hired for myself over the years, I've always seen my role of leader as one of creating and providing an environment that employees enjoy being part of. So it's not enough to turn up to work just because they're going to get a certain amount in their bank account. You've got to create a culture that is stimulating. They're going to learn something, but we're going to have some laughs along the way. It's going to be fun. They're going to interact with people that they enjoy. So the environment for them to be able to then be happy, comfortable, which will enable them to perform well. And then providing them tools. My job is to make sure that the heating and light bills are paid and they've got a working computer and it's not going at a snail's pace, or whatever it is they need from a resources standpoint and tools. And then trying to help them develop. And you spoke to the people who've worked for me. I am not sure I could tell you how I do this. I think they know where the line is, where I draw the line. So they know if they're going to step over that line, then it's going to be not curtains, but we're going to have a conversation. But within those lines, there's quite a lot of leeway for them to do their thing. I think the days of if you're not at your desk at 9 o'clock in the morning and you're not still here at 5:30, then you're not performing. I think that is seriously outdated. You've got to allow for people they've got a doctor's appointment or they've got other things to do. My yardstick is as long as the work's getting done and is getting done as well as it can be done, I'm not so fussed about what hours you're in the office. And so I think people have recognized and respected that freedom to build work and personal life into hopefully a good balance for them, but with the overriding context that they want to do well and they want to grow, and I'm there to support and help them develop and go and do greater things. So it's always been fun. We've had a lot of laughs. I'm a good believer in you have to have a lot of humor in the day, because again, what's the point otherwise? Being miserable just to make some money in the bank at the end of the month, I don't think is the best way to go through life.
I was very fortunate to be part of some high performance teams, which gave me a lot of personal leeway. Didn't really have schedule. It was all output driven, results driven. I had a lot of flexibility. I could work from anywhere. I mean, going back 20 years, whether it was a plane, a hotel, home, the office. Mm-hmm. And I took that. I really appreciated that. To be fair, I hadn't appreciated how rare that was. I had always had it. And when I set up my own company 5 years ago, that was part of the philosophy of that company. And the team can literally work from anywhere that they like. They can decide to go to a nice destination if the weather's great and work from there if they want. I don't really mind. I mean, and that's part of what we offer. But what's been missing prior to this crisis was the element of trust that enabled some leaders and managers in organizations to let go and just trust their teams, their people. And I think that in itself creates stress within people, because if you're beholden to too many rules and restrictions put on you by a leader or a manager or an organization, then you have to figure everything else out in your personal time. Then you're back to this is your work time, this is your focus, you're here 100%. We don't want to hear about anything else that you've got going on in your life. You're just here for this. Like this whole crisis we've been through, one of the positive aspects is that we all had to open up and say, we've got a lot of other shit going on in our lives. And there had to be this massive amount of trust given. And lo and behold, performance on the most part, if you look across the board, has actually improved. Even with all the other challenges going on, people have managed to pull this together, and they've managed to figure it out. Some of my team from the university who are, I would say, partners, but because they have small apartments, they've been working on their beds while their kids are in the other room. And so that people have figured this stuff out, I feel that maybe that is going to create an opportunity going forward. There is a greater level of trust, and therefore maybe reducing some of these stresses that exist within the workplace, the working environment, and also allowing people to start to move towards a more holistic approach to their life, which is everybody has a holistic approach to life, but sometimes being forced to disconnect it creates this additional level of stress that actually then undermines the performance. So maybe the leaders and managers are their own worst enemy in some respects in terms of impacting the performance of their own team, whereas maybe this could be an enabler to allow them to move in that direction, or at least one aspect. Trust is only one aspect, and then we've got a whole other aspect around the health aspect, mental health, and the physical health. I just want to throw this back to you. Maybe companies have an obligation to remove some of the stresses that they are putting on their employees and their teams in order to allow them to perform better.
As you're talking, what's coming to mind is this distinction between a manager and a leader. And my area of interest is in leadership. And I think managers are those that are very much about control and would have struggled probably at the beginning of this. And certainly I hope a lot of those managers have perhaps become better leaders now because they've been forced almost into this situation, which before they may not have been so aware of. But to your point of a manager saying, well, if I can't see my people around in the office in front of their computers or on the phone, then I can't be confident that work is getting done. It's to your point that the whole trust isn't there. And now maybe they've recognized that it is possible with this different, more remote way of working. But I think the ones that would have been most successful are the ones who already had that leadership ability of they'd built a culture in the area of trust around them that enabled them to transition to this new way of working in a probably quite seamlessly. Because it's a hard thing over time. It'd be interesting. We're still even though it feels like a long time, and this COVID crisis has only been about 3 months, 4 months, but over time, how sustainable can you maintain that? And again, I think we'll see a distinction between good leaders and managers. The good leaders will be able to keep this going and create this culture and environment and get level of engagement with their workforce through remote means, whereas managers, those people who are instinctively more, I'm a manager, I just need to tell you what to do and you get on and do it, they're going to struggle. It's obviously hard to generalize as well, because you take our industry, hotels, the fact is you can't do a lot of hotel keeping from home. You've got to be in the hotel, you've got to be interacting with guests. Obviously there are a lot of functions which can be moved off the hotel, back of house functions, sales and so forth, but ultimately you're still going to need a certain amount of people showing up for their shift on the front desk or whatever it may be. So it is helping them balancing what's going on in personal life and professional life when physically they have to be in a certain location for certain periods of the day.
I'm going to challenge you on that. And the reason I'm going to challenge you a bit is because the way that the industry is moving, which is we want to provide a greater level of hospitality and even more amazing experience, integrating with community, creating communities, hosting the guests, even for a short period of time, so that they have something to remember if they want to. That requires an additional level of complexity. It requires a level of autonomy that you need to give to your teams in the hotel. Less command and control, less direction, less standards, less time kept modeling, whatever you want to call it. Things have to be done in a process. It's much more agreeing what kind of experience you want to create overall and allowing a freedom and flexibility for your teams
that
to
I
do
completely
that.
agree with. Yeah.
So it kind of goes back. So, okay, maybe we can't remove the boundaries of a shift to a certain extent because obviously staff still need to be within that.
Yeah, completely hear you. Yeah, within that time, absolutely. Again, that comes down to trusting the employee, providing them the framework, the training, the culture, what the experience are we trying to create, but allowing that individual interpretation of that to result in guest experience. I think absolutely.
And then I think the link back is the more autonomy, the greater freedom, the more trust that you want to be able to engender, the better place the individuals need to be in from a holistic wellness perspective in order to be successful. Because as soon as you start removing all of those controls that have been in place within the industry for a very, very long period of time, you're asking a lot more of the individual, which is great. But they also need to be in a place where they can deliver from a holistic perspective. So the question is, how can we do that? We're talking about leaders here and holistic leadership, their overall package, but this shouldn't be surely limited to this holistic wellness approach, shouldn't just be limited to leaders, because if their teams are sick, for want of a better word, or not immune or not resilient, even if the leaders are, it doesn't matter. You've got a disconnect in the organization. So how can we move this needle through the organization?
Part of it starts with when you recruit someone. If this level of awareness is important to you as an organization to be able to deliver authentic experience, etc., then trying to measure or assess that at the outset for when you're bringing somebody in, so you don't end up with a bunch of people working for you who are having to try to almost read from a script and act because there's something that they're not genuinely connected with. So it starts there, and then I still think it comes back to creating the culture and environment to enable those people to be who they are within the context of what you as an organization want to be. And I think on the subject of wellness, this is only going to come to the fore more and more as we go forward in terms of employee well-being. And there's a lot of stuff, a lot of press and articles out there about wellness and the role of wellness in hospitality, particularly coming out of this COVID crisis, but it's all coming at it from a guest angle. What are we providing for our guests in terms of everything from highly specialized medical treatments to more traditional spa and well-being? But I haven't seen a huge amount yet on board about the employee well-being. And I think, to your point, employees are going to be in a more stressful environment. It's our duty as employers to pay more attention to the mental well-being of our staff. And that then has the benefit of them enabling them to be themselves and to deliver authentic interactions with guests. I know even before this, Four Seasons has a wellness allowance in their packages for their staff. So there's a certain amount of spend that employees can make on everything from whether it be a yoga lesson or a meditation class or whatever. So they're already thinking in this way, and I'm sure others are doing the same. But I think we'll see over time this mental well-being thread start to run through organizations and start to feature a lot more heavily, all the way from leadership down to the floor, as it were, to enable a healthier organization.
I guess based on this discussion, I'm aware that this is a big ask for leaders and anybody in the hospitality business at the moment. And I think surely we need to just be a little bit kinder to ourselves. You know, this has been one of the most unprecedented times that most of us have ever seen in our lives. And yet we're asking people to perform even better than they ever have. Right. So once again, we have to be careful. We're not asking people to be superhuman. And that's not the angle that we're talking about here. We're talking about making some little adjustments.
Yeah. And I think particularly during this crisis, the last thing people need is probably to hear from another bloody set of consultants saying you should do this, this and this. Right. There's so much out there of people saying, well, you can get very easily sucked into, if I haven't spent this crisis learning a new skill or taking on a new course or haven't painted the house or completely landscaped my garden or something, then somehow I'm a failure. I just perceive pressure. I think people have a lot on their plate, and then to start expecting them to suddenly become gurus and become completely self-aware overnight is completely unrealistic as well. I mean, I think what we're talking about is you and I have seen in our own ways the value of exploring some of these things for ourselves in different ways. And I know you do things that you do, and I have things that I do in terms of checking in and becoming more present. And some of these are very small little things, or taking a pause. And the pause can be a weekend away in the woods, or a pause can be just taking 1 minute before I'm going to get on this conference call just to sit quietly. It can take various forms. So there's a lot of material out there, and people can explore this for themselves, which hopefully can help them build up their inner resilience and their personal immunity to help them ride through these difficult times. times. I don't think people should feel under any pressure to suddenly go and have to try to reinvent themselves and so forth. But there are numerous things that people can do to help them become better leaders, better fathers, better husbands, better wives and children and co-workers and collaborators with each other. And personally, I've gotten to a point where this crisis has brought home to me the importance of just worrying about the day in hand, because yesterday's already gone and dusted. It's finished. Can't worry about that. And tomorrow, who knows what tomorrow is going to bring? We've got so used to this crisis of not knowing what's coming next. So I've got to this point where I'm really just concerned with what's the day in hand going to hold, and what am I doing, and how am I going to get through that, and what joy am I taking from it? So yeah, I think hospitality is a tremendous place. We're obviously going through some hard times. It's very stressful for a lot of people. I think while home working is being touted as this new great thing, I think for a lot of people it's actually not a great thing. Could be bringing all sorts of stress, especially while schools are closed and children are home as well. So it's not easy times, but I think we've got a tremendous community within hospitality, and that to me actually is probably one of the most positive things about the whole thing. I've seen the strength of the hospitality community, and the way people have come together and wanted to exchange and to interact and to support one another has been absolutely fantastic. It just shows the strength of the global village that is the hospitality sector. And I think there's ways to contribute to that. If that's something you're interested in doing, there's all sorts of opportunities to give back and to contribute to the well-being of others in the space. And again, looking at a lot of the leaders I've interacted with over the years, they all have something outside of their professional environment that sucks their attention and that gives them energy, whether it's hobby or sporting interest, or it's community work, or it's sitting on the board of a hospital, or whatever it may be. There's something there that provides a linchpin. It's almost like a centering foundation stone to them that is outside of their day-to-day professional life, but that gives them meaning and a sense of purpose, as I say, beyond the work life.
I guess it also gives them an opportunity to focus on something else. That in itself can be re-energizing, whatever it is. And I think somehow it has to be something that you're passionate about. So going back to the beginning of this, when we were talking in the early part of our career about our instinct, the more I'm going through this, the more I've been through this crisis, and prior to that, it was apparent to me I needed to really start to hone my instinct. I needed to listen to what I was saying to myself. So little things like I realized that I wasn't really breathing properly, spending a lot of time like at desk and everything during this crisis. So I just added 10 minutes breathing to my morning routine every day. It's 10 minutes. I don't even notice it. You wouldn't notice it in the space of a day, but it makes a big difference. This morning, the sun was shining. It's the first time in a while. And I just felt this need to go for a swim. It's freaking cold. But I decided to go for a swim in the lake and get some early morning sunshine with my coffee at some ridiculously early hour. But I felt this need to do it. And more I'm feeling like if I need to do this, I should act on it. It's really important, rather than putting these resistance things in my way, these mental barriers. Yeah. So I think these little adjustments, maybe just doing the best you possibly can, is already good enough. I don't think it's about asking for more than that, but maybe just finding little things that instinctively are going to make you feel better. And that's the thing, better, not worse, right? Yeah,
treat yourself with kindness, accept the way things are. Don't beat yourself up about things that may not be how you think they should look or be perceived to be, but be true to who you are. There's so much emphasis on education and functional skills that I hope over time we start to spend more time on helping people develop their own personal skills and awareness and personal development, because I do think that will have a positive impact on their professional life. I think this is a great time to be spending on some of those things if you're so inclined and if you're interested. But again, don't beat yourself up if suddenly spending 20 minutes breathing or meditating every day, but maybe you want to give it a go and explore. And I think there's so many things out there that can help someone's well-being during this time.
I think that one of the things that we do know in the hospitality space, and you've used this phrase a lot, VUCA, maybe you could just explain that quickly and I'll carry on.
VUCA's been around for about the last 40, 50 years, I guess. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think it was a military term by origin, but it's how do you, in a world where there's an increasing amount of these elements, volatility, uncertainty. I mean, even before COVID, I wrote a piece beginning of last year engineer, if you're a hotelier, a hotel company, and you had things outside of your direct control, like the Gilets jaunes protests in Paris, which killed the luxury hotel business in Paris. You had the protests in Hong Kong, which suddenly Hong Kong's occupancy went down to 30% or whatever it was. So there's these elements, and it's how you respond to those, developing your resilience and capabilities to be able to bob and weave with the ambiguity and the uncertainty. And then, of course, I mean, COVID has just emphasized this more and more, the level of uncertainty. I mean, we don't know what the next 6 months look like. So you got to kind of almost float on the current wherever this river is taking us, but be in as strong a position as you can to be able to change direction as needed, or to be able to grab a floating log going past on the river, whatever it is, but be open to that and be able to respond and react.
I think so. In order to do that the right way, and this is what I liked about what you were saying, and also the going back to some of the great leaders, is this sense of calm. So with all of this going on around, and in order to be in that calm, composed state that is not fake, by the way, that is genuine, the zone. These other elements that you're talking about in terms of development, whether you call it emotional intelligence, awareness, all of these kind of things, which are completely transferable to all parts of your life, not just the professional life. I agree that a greater emphasis on those aspects would obviously prepare people for the VUCA future, which we are most likely going to encounter, because for sure the knowledge is going to become obsolete, right? There's going to be so much disruption and change and innovation and whatever else is going on. The ability to be able to cope with that has to come from a different area of development. And my view is it can come from personal development in these particular areas. And it just becomes part of, we're not saying it's all of it, but it could be part of the personal toolkit combined with a personal community that you build around yourself. So you're not an island. You are actually much, much more than that, with people that help you and you help each other. And together it makes us all a bit stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've moved from obviously IQ, intelligence, right? And then the conversation has shifted towards leaders needing EQ, have that emotional intelligence and be able to relate to people. And now I think there's also an increasing amount of spiritual intelligence and physical intelligence that gets mixed into that melting pot as well. And the spiritual intelligence, having a purpose, having a belief in something, and the physical intelligence of being healthy, knowing your body, gut instincts, and the role of intuition that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. All those things combined will increasingly make you able to deal with these situations in a stronger way. I mean, if you're purely focused on having a high IQ, that's not going to get you very far.
It's all about the holistic approach, Chris. And
there you go.
I think it's been a pleasure having this discussion with you. For the listeners, we'll share a couple of articles that we've both written on various topics. You've got the one on VUCA. We can drop another couple of articles in there. We also were part of a forum where we created an article, Doing the Best You Can, which we'll drop in there as well, as we made reference to that, and so the need for authentic leadership. So wonderful. Thank you very much, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, thanks.
Let's explore this again.
Yeah, look forward to it.